It's not lost on me that I'm going to be the only person today speaking to you who's not with the BBC. I presume this means that my role here is to cause some trouble, so I'll endeavor make an attempt to do that in the next few minutes. I want to begin just by asking a simple question. How many of you this morning, before you had your first cup of coffee or tea, checked your email? Okay, so look around. That's about 97%. One more question. How many of you, last night, after you walked the dog, put the kids to bed, shut off the TV, shut the windows, close the curtains, the last thing you did was check your email? Also 97%. Extra credit question, and by the way, we're not being videotaped, there's no record keeping. How many of you in the last couple of weeks, say 3 weeks, at least once, have woken up in the middle of the night and checked your email? Okay, that's screwed up. Now, when I ask that question among people here across the United States, the answer is very much similar. And a year ago, the numbers were 30% less. We're at a moment in time where things are changing really dramatically. And it's easy for us to say, well, we're digital people, our boss is really demanding, I have developers overseas that I have to manage. The truth is, this is happening to us as managers, as vendors, as human beings, as parents, and it's happening to our audiences. So the reason we're going to talk about curation is that we're at a tipping point where if we don't begin to change the way we engage our audience and invite our audience to participate, we might very well be in 10 years going, oh, that building they built for the BBC, that was such a wonderful museum. Because this may be the last big building the BBC built. It may be that big isn't the measure anymore. So let's dive in and look at some examples, and then I'll hope to give you some takeaways that'll be kind of fun. So there's this temptation when we check our email and log in and check in and like things to say we're plugged in. But the question is really, are we plugged in, or in fact, are we overloaded? And my guess is that all of us individually would say, actually, no. It used to be, we used that, remember how long ago it was we said we surfed the web? Nobody uses that word anymore. It's quaint, right? Surfing. Or we visit the web. Now it's work. And it's hard work. And just as an example, I flew over last night on American Airlines, which in its wisdom has no live television and no internet connection for 7 hours. And when I landed, I had 490 unread emails and realized it was the longest amount of time that I had not been plugged into the web in probably 6 or 7 months. I mean, that was 7 hours of being unplugged. And it was really, and then it was work to get through that inbox. It was not surfing, trust me. So, when we look at the cloud, which gets thrown around as the solution to all this, there's a temptation to present the cloud as this fluffy, lovely, kind of, we're just going to put everything in the cloud. That will solve everything. And yet, I find that analogy kind of unusual because generally clouds are storm clouds. I in fact, think that the challenge for an organization like this one is that the volume is growing exponentially, and so there are really, one choice is we'll make more, right? We'll try and keep up with the volume of the web by making more channels and splintering off more verticals and creating more content. That may be a fool's errand. It may be that no matter how much we try to make as professional media makers, we're not going to keep up with the amount of content that's produced by the group of people formerly known as the audience. So let's look at what that really means. Since the beginning of time, till 2005, we created what amounts to 5 exabytes of data. Now, this is Google's kind of anecdotal data, and you can debate how close it is to being accurate. But this number was everything. We're talking about the Bible, War and Peace, the phone book, love letters, your phone bill. This was data, raw data. Eric Schmidt says we're now creating that much information every 2 days. So when we talk about digital overload and the reason we're checking our email and we're trying to bail this sinking boat with a thimble, I mean, this is what we're up against. And the funny thing is that everything we do to solve it actually makes it worse, right? Because the solution is, well, I'll participate more. Well, I'll tweet more. I'll check in more. So just a couple quick facts. You probably all know these because it's a pretty digital audience, but I just want to make sure we do a little level setting. This is the amount of photos that are being uploaded to Facebook. It's a staggering number. This is what video looks like on the web at YouTube. And just as an example, for those of you who have clients who've told you to make a viral video for them, if tomorrow morning you set out to watch every video that was uploaded to YouTube today, in the last 24 hours, it would take you 8 years without sleep. So this idea that anything we're going to make is going to resonate in this ever maddeningly large collection is virtually impossible. And then this is why we never keep up with our emails anymore. By the way, if I could have a bottle, a genie bottle, and make one wish today, I would only do one thing for the planet, and you would remember me forever. I would kill the BCC. What an evil invention that thing is. So, you know, this is the acceleration that we're talking about, and it's really quite stunning. And, you know, I'll share with you people often say to me, well, I don't understand Twitter. I don't like it. It's people tweeting about what they ate for lunch. And my reaction is, it's like going to the store and buying a radio and turning it on, and the first thing you come across is a station you don't like. And so you go back to the store and return the radio and say, I don't like what's on. If you don't like what you're hearing on Twitter, you didn't tune it properly, because the volume isn't going to go down. So this is, I think, a fascinating slide. This is down in that, see the blue box in the corner? Below that, the pink box inside the blue box, that is the Library of Congress. That's Facebook. So whenever anyone complains about timeline on Facebook, what I try and explain to them is Facebook didn't want to reinvent its interface. They knew what we now are experiencing, which is that the volume is so stunningly dramatic and shows no signs of slowing down that if they don't find better ways to filter, you will simply shut them off. You will tune them out. And in fact, increasingly I'm hearing from people, yeah, I just don't use Facebook as much. I can't manage the volume. So when we get to this place of signal and noise, one of the things that happens, and what I would raise as a concern for all of us as professional media people, is that when we have too much noise and the relevance gets drowned out, our audiences really only do one thing. For those of you who have kids, you'll know this face. This is what they do. And increasingly, we have people who are saying, you know what? My answer to the I can't separate the signal from noise problem is like that. And the problem with that behavior, the tuning out behavior, is that it's not selective. It tunes out a great big channel. So this is the question that I would ask those of you who are vendors to the BBC and those of you who are with the BBC. And it's a painful question, and one that will haunt you in your sleep. If your audience could bring one information source to a desert island, would it be you? And the reason why that's an important question is that I believe that we have just arrived at the moment where people are actively tuning things out. And I'll ask you to I will just tell you what I do, and you see if this resonates with your behavior. I now actively unsubscribe to newsletters that bother me. Just started doing it about 6 months ago, and I'm literally looking for that unsubscribe button. Get out of my mailbox, get out of my life. And once you click that button, they go away and they never come back, right? So I used to worry, well, if I click that button, maybe I'm identifying myself as a real email, and I don't know. Screw that. I want to unsubscribe to everything that, and the trigger, as I get overwhelmed, the trigger gets more intense. And so the question for all of us is, how do we remain relevant, and the reason why curation is what we're going to talk about is, at the end of the day, if people are going to start narrowing their sources, they're going to close their number of choices. They're not going to say, I want an unlimited number of sources, I want fewer. How do we end up inside that choice? So when I showed this slide to a friend of mine in New York and said I was going to present it here today, he told me it was brave, and I didn't actually know what that meant. Now I do. But I really do believe this, and I come from a family of content creators. My family are all authors and journalists, so this doesn't make me popular at Thanksgiving. But this idea that content creation is no longer the thing that's the keys to the castle. It's no longer what your audience values, and it's no longer what you get to use as the excuse why you should be in line before somebody else. And I'll just give you, a terrific example of that, Huffington Post. So I'm sure you've all spent some time on Huffington Post. I won't bore you with the stats except to say that the amount of original content on Huffington Post is a staggeringly small percentage of what they aggregate and curate. And yet their audience gets a lot of value from the verticals that they've built because in the attempt to tune out the noise, Huffington Post puts together a mix of original, contributed, and curated content and does it in a seamless way. So I really want to end the content is king era and begin the curation is king era. By the way, I have a slide that also makes curation queen as well, so whichever crown works. So this is the good news part of the talk. Algorithms are broken, they're not coming back. And you know, anybody who's gone on Google searching for an answer to a piece of software that doesn't work and gotten a discussion board post from 4 years ago about a version, 4 versions ago, like knows that the speed of the web, the speed of original content, the speed of the real-time web has exceeded all of the methodology around algorithms. And that's good for us because we're all at some level professional content organizers. And so the fact that we have a role and in fact that our audiences want us, I think is very good for us. How we play that role is a little tricky. So there's no doubt that people will continue to blog, tweet, check in, but creating context, being able to say these stories need to be near each other. If you're interested in this, here are 3 other things you'd like to know. Some of that can come from your friends. Some of that certainly can come from social data. But lots of it comes from editorial. Lots of it comes from us saying, you know what? My gut tells me that this is how I would lay this page out. And so I caution, you know, I live in New York and I spend a lot of time in San Francisco. And this story plays very differently on the 2 coasts in the US. You know, out west, this is you know, considered, you know, essentially a crime against humanity. That, you know, what the West Coast really believes is that when they get you know, what Google will tell you is if they could just get enough of your personal data, they could tell you everything you need to know about the world, about pizza, about movies. Meanwhile, the evidence is actually very different than that. And that's why I think the Facebook-Google battle is very interesting and exciting. So the world needs thoughtful filters. And ideas are now dramatically replacing data, which means humans get to replace robots. And that's why we're here. So what I want to do is just give you 3 specific curation tools, some of which you're all using, some of which I think will come as a surprise. Before I do that, let me just show you three sites that Magnify works with. I was asked to talk about big media companies that use curation effectively. And this may surprise you. They're 3 very different sites. So Magnify powers New York Magazine, which New York Magazine has 10,000 videos on their website, of which they've made something less than 1,000. But if you go to that website and look at their video collection, there's no special box that says, here's the video we've made, and here's the video we've curated from the web. And Michael Silberman, who's the general manager at New York Magazine, when I asked him why he didn't identify the curated content differently, his answer was very interesting. He said, well, we hire freelance photographers, and we don't label them as freelancers. We hire freelance writers, and we don't say staff writer versus freelance writer. If we decide a piece of content is appropriate within our wrapper, and we're going to share it with our readers, then we've given it our brand and our trust, and we consider it to be ours. Now, he didn't mean that from an ownership perspective, but his readers trust that anything that they share has good quality, or quality that's appropriate for that brand. So I think that's interesting, and we don't have time for a live demo today, but New York Magazine actually is a really good example of an old world publisher evolving into the new world. In the middle, you have a surprise, GE, which now curates video from across the web. GE had this idea that they wanted to be thought leaders in the spaces that they work in within the Eco-Imagination website. And what they realized was that part of what they could bring in terms of authenticity was the ability to say, here's a lot of voices around the subject of locomotives or solar energy or green building. And so they work very hard to gather stories around the things that interest them that come from different voices. And then last but not least, on the bottom, we have a site called Mediaite. So Mediaite is a web creation. They were not a media company before they began building websites. Some of you may know it. This is Dan Abrams, who's a US-based lawyer, and he's also a commentator on ABC. And Mediaite now has, I think, 9 or 10 sites. They're very fast growing in the US, and they are entirely curated. They are 100% content that is gathered from multiple sources and given an editorial voice and a certain snarkiness and a certain tone, but it is 100% content that is gathered from third parties and then aggregated. So let's talk about 3 things you can use in curation today. So the first is, and this is tricky for journalists, less tricky for folks in cultural areas. Curators don't get to simply say, here's a bunch of things that you should see, kind of dispassionate, objective. Curators, the successful ones, tend to have a point of view or a voice or an attitude or a tone. They knit things together in a way that creates a story. They add their own content, the content they gather from third parties, and the audience's content. And they knit that together into a coherent whole. But what's interesting is, again, we get back to this idea of people beginning to tune out. In a noisy world, people may want to hear not just your information about a subject, but some other things that the audience has had to say and some things that they've curated, and they want them to all feel like they're of a whole. So it can't be a patchwork. It has to feel coherent. And this idea of what your curatorial voice is not an easy question to answer. Worth spending some time on. The second is, it's funny, this slide, depending on how it's projected, looks like a bunch of big oranges and one small orange, which is a clue about the fact that you actually have to be good at this curation thing. The ability to separate signal from noise, the ability to look at 100 videos and say, here are the 3 that my audience needs to see. The ability to look at a Twitter stream and say, here are the 4 things out of 600 that I'm going to retweet today. Very important. And just by way of example, so I have, I think, somewhere between a lot of followers and not a lot of followers. I don't really know what a lot is anymore. I have 17,000 followers. And I work really hard to make sure that my followers get value out of my Twitter stream. And one of the things I tweet about is curation. I probably read or filter 600 tweets a day. And I retweet 5. And I work really hard to make sure that the 5 things that I rebroadcast to my followers are interesting, valid, thoughtful, and useful. And when I fail at that, I feel it. Like when I get sloppy and I retweet something without checking, you can feel the audience kind of step away. So this idea of being able to separate signal from noise is something that we uniquely, as storytellers, have in our brains, and we need to find a way to use that. And then last but not least, and I didn't hear a lot of this in the earlier presentation, so this is a place where I'll put a little bit of a question mark. I am an old media guy from my previous life as a television producer. I really wanted people to come see my content on my channel. I wanted the audience to come to me. And I believed that I could put little teasers out in the web and eventually I could lure people back to me. I've come to believe that's probably not going to work. And I've watched big brands increasingly say, we're going to Facebook, we're going to Twitter, we're going to Pinterest. We're going to put our content out where people are. I understand that for the BBC, that's probably uncomfortable because we're used to being the host of the conversation. But I would challenge us to think about this question of whether or not part of what we need to do is allow our feeds to be embeddable in third-party sites. Allow people to remix our feeds in ways that we may find wholly inappropriate. But the reality is our audience's behavior says they're going to do that anyway. So either we go where they are or they hang out without us. So those are 3 kind of big ideas. Obviously happy at the cocktails or coffee later to chat about it. But I want to just kind of end with this thought. Today we're all creators. Every one of us in our business life and then also in our personal life is tweeting and Facebooking and linking and checking in. And this idea of participation I thought was fascinating in the data. I think we're all different kinds of participants. And I think we participate differently in different communities. This creates an enormous amount of noise, an overwhelmingly frustrating, horrible din. It's also awesome. So that's our opportunity, right, is to figure out we're not going to slow that down. We're not going to, the number of mobile devices is going to grow exponentially, and people are going to make more stuff. There are going to be more apps that publish more check-ins and more photos and more, it's just, like, you can see where that's going. There's no way that train's going to stop. So the opportunity is for us to figure out how to filter that. The web is absolutely becoming a human network. And I resist this idea that the web is Facebook or Google or Apple or, honestly, or the BBC. The web isn't a company. I really do believe that the web is us. Thank you very much.